What if I told you that there is no future? That the future is fake? The future doesn't exist. The future is totally within your mind. Well, you know that's a bunch of crap because the fact is that there is a future. We're all going to be here tomorrow. Life goes on. We're going to do what it is that we do unless, we get hit by a meteorite or something, which, NASA would tell us about that. Or would they tell us about that? Of course, they'd tell us about that, but though I got to use this tinfoil hat more in my videos. No, I'm not here with some sort of crackpot conspiracy theory about is the future existent or not. That's not what this is about. Instead, we are going to talk about if there is a future tense in English. Do we actually have a future tense or not? Because if you look at Cambridge University's explanation of grammar, when you look up the future, they specifically say in their first sentence that there is no future tense in the English language. And this is also backed up by other things such as the British Council, BBC, English, and other resources that say that there aren't any, future tenses in English. But then you'll also find other resources and other people will say there are future tenses in English. So what is the true answer? Is there a future tense in English or is there not a future tense? And we're going to look at both reasons why one side says one and one side says the other. I'll explain what my opinion is on this at the end of the video, but we're going to delve into this and talk about, is there a future in English? But before we continue, if you're ever interested in taking lessons with me, just go to my website, davesenglish.com, where right on the front page, you can sign up for lessons with me. I do one-on-one lessons with people, and if you see a time available that works for you, feel free to sign up, and I'll be happy to help you with your English learning needs. So let's go ahead and look first at the reason why people say that it is not a tense, because it's a little bit easier to explain this. The reason why people say that it is not a tense is because it doesn't have a verb inflection. So, what is an inflection? An inflection is when we change a word to then change the meaning of a word. So, let me give you an example. The word happy is an adjective. Now, happy has a comparative and superlative form. So, we say happy, and if we want to use the comparative, we say happier. So we actually change the word. We drop the Y, we add the IER at the end. And we do this with many words. I mean, it's an inflection when we have a noun like car and then add an S. That is changing it to indicate that it's plural. And of course, we do this with our tenses. So instead of saying I go, we would say I went to indicate the past. We change that. Or I have gone if we want to use the perfect tense. We can also say I had gone, having two inflections in there to indicate a past perfect as well as the perfect tense with the third form. So as you can see, what inflection does is it actually changes the word so that you know something else is happening, that we're not using it in its traditional base form. And this is especially the case with verbs. Now, when it comes to the future, we don't have an inflection for the future. We have our three forms, right? We have our present simple, past simple. We also have past participle. We also have present participle as well, but we don't have any inflection that we change a verb to indicate that it's in the future. So this is the reason why Cambridge University and others say that there aren't any future tenses of verbs, because there aren't any inflections to any verbs to indicate the future. And this is where that theory comes from. Now, what about those people who say that there are future verb tenses? Well, they obviously can't use the inflection method because it's totally proven that there isn't an inflection to indicate the future. Instead, they use something called a periphrastic approach. Now, what is periphrastic? What do we mean by this? This is when we actually add other words on to then change the meaning. So when we were looking at inflection, we were looking at actually changing the word itself from happy to happier. But in this case, what we're doing is adding more words to then indicate something that's happening with the word that we're trying to change. Let's go ahead and look at what we were talking about with adjectives. So let's take the word intelligent. So we don't say intelligent, intelligenter, intelligentist. That is wrong. We don't use inflection to indicate the comparative and superlative when it comes to intelligence. Instead, what we do is we add more and most. So we do this periphrastic approach and we say important or intelligent. I forgot what word I was using. Let's just go with intelligent. Intelligent, more intelligent, the most intelligent. So in that sort of situation, you can see that we are just adding words to indicate if something is comparative or superlative. And this is why people say that there are, in the case of verb tenses, there are periphrastic future verb tenses, because we add the words like will to it. We can add be going to, that we add words to it to then create a tense, which would be a future tense. This is where people who argue that there is a future tense lie, saying, yes, it might not be the inflective way of doing it, it is another way, and therefore the tense still exists. So is there a future tense or not? To me, I don't think so, because I think that there are a few flaws with the periphrastic approach, which makes it that it doesn't necessarily explain everything, where when we look at inflection, it actually does explain everything. If it has an inflection, then it is, something that is changing. If our verbs are based off of inflection and the tenses of those verbs are based off of inflection and there are no future inflections, then therefore there can't be any future tense verbs. There's no way to put them in that way. But what are the reasons why? I'm going to put a link down below to some authors, some academics who have written about this, so you can get a little bit more of an idea, but I'll put the names up here right now. That a lot of these authors will say, well, with the periphrastic approach, it doesn't explain everything, because it explains will and maybe be going to, but what if you use a sentence that's just a present simple sentence, I work tomorrow, or you use a present continuous sentence, I am visiting my friends next week. By adding tomorrow and next week, you are changing the context. And yes, you are adding more words, but you're not necessarily grammatically changing the sentence like you do when you are adding will as a modal verb that then modifies a main verb. You're not really modifying the verb when you're saying, I work tomorrow. You're adding more of a time context to it. So a lot of people say that when you look at this approach, there can be a flaw because there just isn't there's so many ways that you can do it that you can't explain them all. The second reason is the word will, that we can use the word will beyond just being something to indicate the future. So for example, we can say water will boil at 100 degrees centigrade. Now, this is a zero conditional sentence. This is just a pure fact, but we're using the word will in this sentence. And when we do that, we're not indicating that water will in the future boil at 100 degrees centigrade. No, what we're saying is that this is just what happens normally. So using will in this case is not using will for the future. So these are some of the reasons, as far as what academics have said, the reasons why I don't believe that it's a future tense. Now, another reason I'm not a big fan of it is just as an English language teacher. So future tense might be taught to people who have a future tense in their native language, and it provides just this easy transition. However, it can maybe provide a false transition that people will think that, oh, well, this is future tense in English, so therefore I need to structure my sentences in this way. And when we look at describing the future in English, there's a lot more nuance to it than just saying there's a future tense. This is how you explain the future by using this future tense. So I might ask a student or ask somebody on the street, what are you doing this weekend? And they might say, he's asking about the future, so let me answer with using a future tense. And my answer would be, I will work this weekend. Now, that would be an incorrect sentence. We would say, I am going to work this weekend. We can say, I work this weekend, or I am working this weekend. See, there's not just one explanation. There's not just one reason there. But if a student is thinking about the future as a tense, then they might incorrectly put things together and then give the wrong answer by using will or be going to or something like that, instead of maybe a different answer that would have been more appropriate. And in this situation, if I ask someone, what are you doing this weekend? You could just simply answer, I work. Because I have already created a context by asking, what are you doing this weekend? I've already created a context that we are talking about the future. So if you say, I work, you are just purely saying a present simple sentence. You're not adding anything else to it. I have created the context from the question. And I wanted to create this video, and I wanted to say a lot about this because I think there's this debate as to if there is a future tense or not. Most of the academics out there will say no. They'll say that we have to make changes to sentences in order to indicate that we're talking about the future. But that in and of itself doesn't make it a tense. It's been really hard to find a lot of academics who actually side on the periphrastic approach to the future and saying that there's a future tense. Most go with the inflection and look at that and say, well, there are no inflections for the future, therefore it doesn't exist. However, I think there's a debate starting to brew from this where people are starting to get more and more of an opinion and looking at even the subject itself in a more nuanced way. But you have to look at the future as nuanced. You can't just look at it as, oh, he's talking about the future, I will put will in the sentence and therefore it's in future tense. No, it doesn't work that way. It's not that easy. So go ahead and comment down below. Which one do you think is correct? Which one do you think explains it more? And before you comment, remember, we are talking about the English language. So don't say, hey, in Russian or in Spanish or in German, we do this or whatever. We're not talking about those. Now, if you're talking about the Germanic history of languages and then talk about how that transitions over to English, fine. But remember, if something happens in your language, doesn't mean it happens in our language. So just keep that in mind. So thank you all very much. I'm finally somewhat over the C word now. And no, that's not that C word. But I'm planning on making more videos. I feel healthier again, and I think I'm back on track. So thank you all very much. Thank you all who said, wished me well while I have been sick. And yeah, I'm looking forward to making more videos in the future. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful day wherever it is you are, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.